أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So today, inshallah, I'm going to continue a little bit with what we've been talking about for those of you who have attended. And today's topic is going to be a topic, the topic is called Tamkin. And as it is used by proponents sort of extremism and things like that. And some of the topics that I have discussed in this series, there are topics that traditionally they exist in Islam, like jihad, for example. You know, jihad is a classically discussed topic, and you know there are books about it and chapters in law about it and things like that. And you can go back to those sources and you can understand where the misunderstanding comes from. But there are a lot of topics that are sort of invented. So this is one of those topics that's invented. There is no topic in classical Islamic writings called Tamkin. Tamkin is simply a word lifted from certain verses in the Quran, and it is made a topic, or it is made an issue by certain groups. So that's something that's worth noting, that these are sometimes the confusion comes that the concepts themselves are just invented as a topic all into itself. So I usually begin with a picture. So this is a very familiar picture for everyone. You know, you use your phone to get around, whether you're walking, whether you're driving. And the reason I have this picture is that the issue is if you want to arrive. Now, obviously, if you keep going the wrong way, it will auto-correct you. Right? So eventually, the idea is you'll arrive. But if you want to arrive quickly or on time, you need to be able to read the map. You need to be able to read the prompts. So, take a left here after, X number of feet, take this exit after a quarter of a mile. You have to have some sense in your mind of how much a quarter of a mile is, how fast I'm going. You have to be able to see, and you're hearing the prompt, and you're seeing the exit, or you're seeing the turn, or something like that. Right? You have to have some kind of interaction with the map for you to be able to arrive. And this concept that we're going to talk about today, either correctly understood or incorrectly understood, really has to do with how you interpret the prompts that are happening to your life, that are happening around you. Because a lot of what we're going to talk about today, Tamkin as political power, as political strength, has to do with how we interpret the world around us, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed or not allowed certain things to happen, very much the way the map. So I just, I like to add an image because sometimes it's helpful that we can, use it as an example. So Tamkin, what does it mean? Just as a word, it means to make someone established over something. Okay? That's all that Tamkin really means. To have mastery over something, to be able to do something, to be able to master certain physics, or so you have Tamkin over physics, to be able to speak and write in the Arabic language, to have Tamkin over the Arabic language. That's what the word means. It has nothing to do with politics, it has nothing to do with power, earthly power, military power. It can be used, and it is used for that context, but that's not all that the word means. And that's really the whole point of this discussion, is that this is what we're going to talk about now for the next 15, 20 minutes or so is really made up, is made up. And if you go back, as simply as if you go back to the definition of the word, you can understand where a lot of this misconfusion comes from. So unlike what I usually do, I want to begin by talking about how extremists use the concept of Tamkin. I want to do that first, and then we'll come back to sort of what the Quran says. I have been, over the last year or so, as I do this series, I've been trying to build, I know not everyone has attended everything, but I discuss the topics in a certain order, because when we come to a topic like today's of Tamkin, it's really important that we have some kind of previous knowledge. Oh, did I lose the slide? Oh, it's on the top there. Sorry. There we go. It helps to have some kind of background. So, Many moons ago, we talked about this concept of al-jahiliyyah, which is, in our understanding, is a term that has historical significance. That's how Muslims traditionally refer to the state of the Arabian Peninsula before the advent of the Prophet ﷺ. We say that the Arabs lived in this state of ignorance, morally, spiritually, financially, politically, and it's our way of talking about how incredible it was that the Prophet ﷺ came with this message to liberate people from all of this ignorance. And that's essentially how Muslims, have used this concept. But extremists, they take the concept of jahiliyyah and they say, no, jahiliyyah is not a historical condition only. It's a condition that can exist at any time, at any place. And people like Sayyid Qutb and others, and I spent a lot of time talking about Sayyid Qutb specifically because he is one of the biggest proponents of this, how they argued that jahiliyyah is essentially the state of the Muslim world today. And as a matter of fact, not only that, but Islam doesn't exist anymore today. Okay, this is their thinking. So the concept of tamkeen as political power really stems and builds on this concept of jahiliyyah. Why do we need to have political strength, military strength? Because there's no more Islam. We've lost it. It doesn't exist. So if you believe that it no longer exists, you got to bring it back. So how are you going to bring it back? You got to bring it back by force, by any means necessary. What are you going to use to justify that? I'm going to use this concept of tamkeen. I'm going to lift some verses from the Quran and I'll be like, see, that's the justification for me having to do this. Okay, so the first thing is that it builds on this concept of jahiliyyah. Now this is it's not like necessary that if you believe in one concept, the other concept follows. It's not really a science like that. But for the people that espouse this kind of thinking, if you scratch underneath the surface, you will see that they believe in this concept that Islam really doesn't exist the way it's supposed to exist. So the next corollary to this is that you need some kind of force, some kind of constant struggle, they use the word jihad, to gain political and military strength. Okay, so that there's no more Islam. Islam that we see today is fake. Everyone is morally corrupt. We're not really Muslims. We're not following the true Islam. So therefore, I have the right to bring it back by force. What do I call this? I call this jihad. This is like the mighty, call to arms that will bring back, glory, so on and so forth. So you can see by what I've just stated is that I've really, I've created this story and I've put and plugged into it certain words that we've heard before. We all know that there's something in Islam called jihad, right? Now, if we didn't live in the context that we live in and understand that it's a very sensitive term to just say it and not explain it to people, if we were somewhere else, we might get like very emotional. So if somebody keeps saying jihad, look what Allah says about jihad, look at what the Prophet ﷺ promised about the mujahideen, and then this is our jihad, people get emotional. So you can see how people, not knowing any of these details, kind of get swept into a lot of these things. So sometimes people, they join these, extremist efforts almost because they're just, foolhardy, trying to do good, but not really seeing the devils in the details, not seeing that this is not jihad at all. This is not what our religion talks about when it uses the concept of jihad. And we talked about that a couple of times ago. And then the ultimate use of this concept of tamkeen is that we are going to destroy all of these existing nation states. And notice how extremists in the family of Islam, in the house of Islam, they always direct their violence and extremism towards Muslims. Right? Not towards non-Muslims, but it's primarily towards Muslims. So all of these Muslim states, governments, constitution, republics, kingdoms, sultanate, whatever we call them, they're all bad. It's very reductive. They're all bad, and we have to bring them down. We have to destroy this power, we have to destroy this state, we have to subvert it, and we have to gain strength. Why? Because this is what the concept of tamkeen means to them. Okay? So this is very reductive, of course. I mean, but in the time that we have, I want everyone to understand in a very super simple way, this is what an extremist narrative of the concept of tamkeen would mean. Before we understand what the Quran says about it, and we'll get into sort of unpacking why all of this is wrong and incorrect, what is the background Like the people that, there are, what I just stated, there are people that actually write this. They actually say this. Sayyid Qutb, for example, he has pages and pages in his commentary on Surah Yusuf. Because when Joseph alayhi salam, when he tells the Egyptians, make me, the one that's in charge of the harvest. اجعلني على خزائن الأرض. Make me in charge of the compiling the harvest and stockpiling the harvest. They use this, which is actually part of the verse. And I'll show you why it's so important. That's only part of the whole verse. They use this half verse as justification for everything that I just said. You see, Yusuf himself, Joseph asked for power, asked for political office and responsibility. See, the Quran justifies it, so we have to do it. So in that section, for example, Sayyid Qutb, he has a lot of pages, and there are other writings and things like that. But what's the background? This is really almost more important than the concept. What's the background to that narrative? The first is that these people that espouse this, they oftentimes talk about the backward state of the ulama, of the jurists, particularly fuqaha, people that interpret Islamic law. And they say, these jurists, these ulama, they're really backward. And the whole idea of Islamic law is stagnant. We have no real movement in Islamic law. How many people have heard people espouse that about Islam? How many people, have you heard this before? That the ulama have done nothing really important for the last several hundred years. For the last several hundred years, there's been no ijtihad. The gates, the doors of ijtihad have been closed, right? We hear this, okay? This concept actually comes from early Orientalists' misinterpretation of medieval Muslim jurists talking about ijtihad. So there's a Dutch Orientalist, for example, his name is Hergranje Snoek, who actually, his writings on Islam are actually very fascinating, but he read a 19th century Shafi'i manual. And the reason I know this is because this is one of the books that I actually studied, so I'm familiar with this book. And he says that the Imam that wrote the book, in his introduction, he talks about the different levels of ijtihad and how they don't exist anymore. And when I read that, I said, that's very strange, because I studied that book. I never remember reading that. So I went and it's like the first introduction of the book. I opened the book and I read. I was like, oh, he's saying like that the first kind of ijtihad no longer exists because we already have the madhahib. Like no one's going to create a new madhab. But ijtihad, as understood from the lens of Islamic law, there are no doors to it for it to be open or closed. Ijtihad is an obligation on the ummah that exists until the end of time. I mean, that's what we were taught. And that's why we study Islamic law. And it's funny how this, as a European misunderstanding of Islam, has now been appropriated by Muslims and used by Muslims against Muslims to discredit the ulama and say, these ulama, they suck. They don't know anything, they're backward, they're antiquated, and things like that. So who are the people that really know? It's the fiqh, the ulama of activism, al-haraqa. Not the activists, or not the ulama of papers, of books, al-awraq. So they actually look down upon the academic study of Islam. We can understand where, if somebody looks down at education, you can understand a lot about, their MO in general. So these extremists, people that espouse this concept of tamkin, they'll actually look down upon people who have spent years studying Islam. The academic endeavor to interpret the Quran, to interpret the Sunnah, they'll see this as, backward. They see it, look at the derogatory term, fiqh of books, fiqh al-awraq. Meaning, just like some theoretical mumbo jumbo. What you really need to have the fiqh of the haraka, of the activists. We're the people on the streets that actually know what's really going on. So it's almost like a position of arrogance. So it comes from this sort of disparaging view, and this is this right here, this point right here, is the number one problem that from it emerges this concept of extremism within the family of Islam. It's this arrogance that the people who have spent the time to inherit the inheritance of the Prophet, because this Sharia and these studies, we call this the inheritance of the waratha of the Prophet ﷺ, that they actually arrogate to themselves that they know more than that. And if that's your position, then really anything is possible. You'll make Islam into anything that you want. And then of course the society that currently we call Muslim societies are not really Muslim, something that stems from this concept of Jahiliyyah, and therefore we need to have a constant form of struggle. And the constant form of struggle against society, rather than go from the bottom up, we're going to go from the top down, and we're going to take military action, violence to remove those in power and create a new state, a new quote-unquote Islamic state of our own. Okay, this is how the concept unfolds. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not very complicated what I just said. Other than the fact that this is not what the word tamkeen means in the Quran at all. But if for the people that espouse this term, that's the sort of the way of their thinking. So when we want to find out about things in our religion, we go back to the Quran and say, what does the Quran say actually about this word? So I'm going to put up a few verses that use the word tamkeen from the Quran. I've highlighted it in its English as established, so we can see. So this is the first verse from Surah Al-A'raf, verse 10. And we have certainly established you upon the earth and made for you therein ways of livelihood. Little are you grateful. Okay? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us as a race, as humankind, that He has given us this earth as an opportunity to do things. The oxygen we can breathe, the water we can drink, the livestock we can eat from, or we can till our land, we can harvest our crops. He has made the earth, He has established us on the earth, meaning He has made it suitable for us to use. Okay, it has nothing to do with politics and state and government and all of that. He's reminding us that He has created us, but He has made this earth a certain way for us to be able to use it. He has given us some kind of power or mastery over it, that we can use it for our benefit, but most of us are not grateful. So this is we read this verse and we say, oh, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, look, we don't have to struggle to breathe, we don't have to struggle to eat, we don't have to struggle to drink. I mean, everything has been facilitated for us. That's the idea behind the verse. It has nothing to do with politics and government. Surah Al-An'am, verse 6. Have they not seen how many generations we destroyed before them, which we had established, again using the word tamkeen, upon the earth, as we have not established you? And we sent rain from the sky upon them in showers and made rivers flow beneath them. Then we destroyed them for their sins and brought forth after them a generation of others. So here Allah is telling us, don't you look to history and see how many people had more than what you have. We gave them more tamkeen. We gave them more abundance of mastery and power, and they misused it, and they sinned, and because of their sin, they are no more. Meaning, look to the past and reflect that we don't want to fall into that. So here, tamkeen is given to people that are not righteous. It's almost given like as a test. It's given to people that are not worthy of it. Has nothing to do with power or politics or the Islamic State or any of that. Allah is saying, look to the past. Look to human history and see what has happened before you. Okay, so this is another usage of the word tamkeen. And then in Surah An-Nur 55, and there are many others by the way, these are just 3 verses. Allah has promised those who have believed amongst you, done righteous deeds, that He will surely grant them succession upon the earth. Okay, this is some kind of political authority, that makes sense. As He granted it to those before them, and that He will surely establish, makkana, for them their religion. So here, the greatest form of tamkeen, Allah is saying, is to have tamkeen over your own deen. That you have control over your religion. That your religion means something to you, that we act upon it, that it fulfills us, that it unleashes this human creativity in us, to allow us to accomplish those things that we wouldn't be able to without it. So here, for the righteous, for those that are heedful of this advice of the message, so on and so forth, this verse is saying the greatest form of tamkeen is to have tamkeen in your religion. Again, the word tamkeen in this verse is not associated with political power, military strength, jihad, so on and so forth, but rather that our religion is sound. Okay? And these are just 3 verses. I mean, there are many more, but the same word, tamkeen, tamkeen, tamkeen. So what is the normative? I call this the normative usage. I mean, how does the Quran use this word? If we were giving a lecture on Quranic Arabic, and today's lecture was about the word tamkeen, how is tamkeen used in the Quran, irrespective of the context of this talk being about extremism, okay? What is the usage of this word? Well, it's not about political strength, okay? It's not just given to the righteous, because it can be given as a test. If you are given mastery over something, if you are given authority over something, if you are given ability over something, then automatically in our ethical system that translates as test. There should be a big flashing light, warning, this is a test. How will you use this authority? How will you use this responsibility? Okay? The ultimate form of mastery or tamkeenism or however you want to talk it is for one's religion to be established. And that's why, for example, we have so much to be thankful for being in this country, that we have this ability to congregate, to teach, to practice our faith. No one is here stopping us from congregating, and we are allowed to do this, and we celebrate the opportunity to do this. This is a form of tamkeen for us in our faith, that we have this ability. And the most important thing about tamkeen is that every reference of tamkeen is that it comes from God, it doesn't come from us. So tamkeen is something that is given to us, not something that we take for ourselves. Again, that's the Achilles heel to the extremist understanding. That you don't take it, but it's given to you. It's the circumstances of your life as they unfold, then you see, okay, Allah has made this, has facilitated for me to do this. You can't sit here and say, I really want to be, I want to go to space. I want to build a rocket and go to space. But you spent your whole life studying accounting. Well, there's no tamkeen. I mean, you got to change that. You got to go study something else, or join a company, or do something else, or read about that, so that tamkeen will unfold. You can't be here and then look over there and be like, well, I want that, so I'm going to go grab it and take it by force. It doesn't work like that because it hasn't been facilitated. So tamkeen is you can almost say it is a result of your efforts. And because we are people that believe, we say that that's the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's grace upon us, upon our trying, that has become facilitated. Okay, so that's how the word is used. And notice how it has nothing to do with politics and power and jihad and military strength and jahiliyyah and Islam is gone and all of that kind of stuff. It's just a word from the Quran that's been lifted, and now we're spending an hour talking about it. So where does this concept of extremists, as they use this concept of tamkeen as political strength, where does it come from? So I mentioned Yusuf alayhi salam earlier. So in this verse 55, Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, appoint me over the storehouse of the land. Indeed, I'll be a knowing garden. Ij'alni ala khaza'in al-ard. Okay? Right? That's this verse. If you read Sayyid Qutb's tafsir of it and the other proponents of this concept, you'll see how everything that I've said about the extremist version, how it sort of stems from this concept. Well, look, Joseph took it here. Clearly, he's asking for political strength. So if he's a prophet and he did that, we have the ability to do that. But I want you to let us look at the story of Joseph in its true context. So Allah says in this verse, earlier in verse 21, remember what happened to Joseph. Joseph, he had this dream, right? That the stars, the moons were prostrating to him. And he told his father. Who is Joseph's father? Jacob. Who is Jacob's father? Ishaq, Isaac. Who is Isaac's father? Abraham. I mean, look at that, you know. His father, Jacob, his grandfather, Ishaq, his great-grandfather, Abraham. They're all Anbiya, they're all prophets. So when Joseph says the dream, his father knows what the dream means. He knows that this is a sign of prophecy. So he says, you know, don't tell your brothers, they're going to get jealous. But the brothers of Joseph were all jealous of Joseph, so they threw him in this well. They just threw him for dead. Okay? And then the people traveling, they come to the well to draw water, and they find Joseph. Right? And Joseph is taken from the well and sold into slavery to Al-Aziz, this big shot, you know, VIP of Egypt, called Al-Aziz. So now Yusuf a.s. is essentially a slave in this big shot's house. And we have the problem between Joseph, because he was very beautiful, you know, mashallah, very handsome. And by the way, you know where the beauty of Joseph comes from? His physical beauty. It's a manifestation of the beauty of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's because through the Anbiya that the genetic package of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is transferred. Anyway, so Joseph and the wife of the Aziz, they have this problem. So Joseph asks Allah to send him to prison as a way out of this problem. So he ends up he's a convict, he's in jail. So we know the story of Joseph, it's very crazy. He didn't choose any of this, right? So what Allah says about this is, He says, and from the one of Egypt who bought him. So remember, he's now a slave. He said to his wife, make his residence comfortable. Perhaps he will benefit us, because he's young and he's healthy, you know, so he can carry things, and you know, he has energy. Or we will adopt him as a son. And thus we established makanna li Yusuf. Again, the word of Tamkin, makanna li Yusuf, in the land, that we might teach him the interpretation of events. So his gift, his prophetic gift, was the ability to interpret dreams. And Allah is predominant over his affair, but most of the people do not know. So all of this story, this dramatic story of Joseph, was a way for Allah to give him tamkeen. So now he has access to Egypt. He has access to the government. And through this issue of learning how to interpret dreams, when he's imprisoned, he becomes an asset, because the people in the government know that there's somebody that can interpret the dream of Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh has this wacky dream about big calves and little calves, and a reoccurring dream, he says somebody's got to interpret this, something's going to happen to Egypt. So they go to Joseph. So now all of the keys are with him, because he is the one that's going to interpret. Essentially, in our language today, he's going to give them the roadmap to deal with the environmental crisis that is about to happen and prevent Egypt from falling into famine. And at that point, he says, make me in charge because I'm honest. That's a very, very different narrative than when I say we have to take the government by force, because Joseph took the government by force. But he didn't. He was a slave and then he was imprisoned. But all of that was Allah's way. We. وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And in this way, Allah says, and in this way we have given tamkeen to Joseph throughout the land. So you see how it was unrolled for him. So it only made sense at that time that he asks, okay, well now I would like to be in charge. Get me out of jail because I don't belong here. I didn't do anything wrong. And now this is where I can serve. A very, very different, you know, sometimes when I prepare for this, I say, can it really be this simple? You know, yes, it really is this simple. This is how grossly ill-informed these people are. So the first thing is that his tamkeen was given to him by circumstance of his life. He didn't seek this out. He didn't want to be thrown in the well. He didn't want to be sold into slavery. He did not want to have this fitna with the wife of the Aziz. He definitely did not want to go to jail. But all of those circumstances were preparation for him. And that's just the beginning of the story. I mean, the story of Joseph is phenomenal, really. It's one of the greatest stories of the Quran. And the basis of his tamkeen was knowledge. If you follow the story of Joseph and you follow the association of the word tamkeen with the story of Joseph, It's all about Allah teaching Joseph. He taught him the interpretation of dreams. And this exchange is constant throughout that chapter. That his source of his establishment is because of his knowledge and his abilities. So that he has mastery over a certain skill and he's able to use it. And of course, he asked based on this circumstance. Not that that was like his game plan, from the beginning and he got it by force. It was a function of his circumstance. And of course, the theological component is that God and God alone allows this to happen. The last sort of set of example is the story of Dhul Qarnayn that we find in Surah Al-Kahf, because this is also another usage of tamkeen by extremists from the Quran. In these two verses, I actually think it's 85 and 80, no, it is 84 and 85. So they ask the Prophet ﷺ about Dhul Qarnayn, say, I will recite to you about him a report. Indeed, we established him upon the earth. إِنَّ مَكَّنَّا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. And we gave him to everything a way. What does that mean? Dhul Qarnayn, he had the skills and the ability to build things and to do things. So when he traveled and he met the people that were complaining about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, they said, can you protect us? He's like, yeah, I can plug that hole, I can build this bridge, I can, bring me the steel and the, steel in the ancient world. He had the ability to do that. That's what that verse means, that Allah had given him that skill set. So he must have had scientists and surveyors and metal experts and mineral experts and technologies that he was able to extract from the earth these minerals, these metals, and build things that people couldn't build. So he was given a certain skill set. So think about us now and all the technology that we have. This is a form of tamkeen for us. But remember I said tamkeen is a test. What are we going to do with all of this stuff that we have? Are we going to build something or destroy something? Are we going to help somebody or hurt somebody? So Dhul Qarnayn, as an example in Surah Al-Kahf, he's helping these people out. So he had been given a way to help people out by that certain skill set that he had. In this case, metals, minerals, construction, engineering, so on and so forth. Not that, he is coming to usurp some kind of, state power or political power for himself. So the worldly conditions were given and made easy for him. And because of that, we retrospectively, at the end of it, we say, Allah had given him this tamkeen, this form of mastery over those things. So you can see these are just some examples. The Quran is very rich and everything, and I didn't even talk about the hadith literature today, but in just very simple readings of the Quran, we see that the way Allah uses this word, this concept of tamkeen, is that it's something that He gives to you, that you take the opportunities that are in your life, you grasp them, you act upon them, and then you hope and pray that there is tawfiq, that there is grace in that, and that you accomplish something. And at the end you look back and you say, yeah, Allah, He gave me this mastery over this thing. Not that it is used exclusively for political power, and definitely not something that is to be taken, usurped. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he specifically said in Bukhari and Muslim and other collections, do not ask for political power. Because the person who asks for political power, it will become a problem for them. So our view of political and worldly power is that it is given. يُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah gives political power to whom He wills. وَيَنْزَعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ يَشَاءُ. And He yanks it away from whomever He wills. So if you want to be in the power game, in politics and stuff, don't do that in the name of Islam. Because Islam is not a vehicle to that end. Islam is a religion, it's a spiritual practice, it's a way that we conduct ourselves in public and in private. It's not about getting political power. And that is why political parties that associate themselves with religion are very dangerous. Because they end up on this very, very slippery slope of almost saying, well, we're Muslim and we're the Muslim political party, so therefore we're right and you're wrong. And while we're at it, we're Muslim and you're not. So, well, actually, if we're Muslim and you're not, then we are the ones that should come to power. And then that's just a hair's length away from saying we're going to just take it by any means necessary. And that's how all of this Tamkin stuff in the extremist narrative unravels. But if somebody wants to be involved in politics, even if it's sort of just elections and public service, civil service, that kind of stuff, that's fine, but you can't do that in the name of Islam. You can't do that in the name of religion. Because religion can't be something that's divisive. It has to be something that brings us together. So if I form a political party, imagine if I told you that I voted for and support President Trump. Imagine if an American Muslim said that. I mean, most Muslims in this country would find that to be a detestable thought. And that actually is a problem, because we're almost saying that he's like the anti-Muslim candidate, and then the other candidate is the Muslim candidate. But it doesn't work like that. An argument can be made for both and an argument can be made against both. So injecting Islam into that partisan politics, and this is, I know there's a little bit of a tangent, but it's sort of related to what I'm talking about, is very dangerous. And unfortunately, a lot of our Muslim organizations in this country are moving towards that. That we're somehow, I don't know when this happened, it's almost like overnight we became like the democratic religion. So now we can only be Democrats. And maybe there's a lot of the Democratic Party that, yeah, we jive with. But that doesn't mean that's like the quote-unquote Islamic Party. Don't fool ourselves about that. There is no Islamic Party in this country. There's this platform and then there's that platform. There's this candidate, there's that candidate. And we should support candidates based on the merits that they have for the well-being of the common good, not for the well-being of Islam. And graft Islam on it. Because then we will become split. Our community will become split. Muslims for this and Muslims for that. I'm against that. I think that's very dangerous. We're citizens, we're equal citizens. We can support candidates openly, privately, that's fine, but not in the name of religion. Because Islam is not a tool to be used in politics. And this is an example. This conversation this afternoon is an example of how that can unwind in a very, very dangerous way. I'm going to stop here, inshallah, and see if there are any questions that you may have.
Any particular reason why they would apply the concept of Tamkin to predominantly Muslim societies as opposed to non-Muslim nation states?
The question is, why do some of these people apply the concept of Tamkin to Muslim societies as opposed to non-Muslim societies? I think a lot of that has to do with the history of these groups, that they emerged from the Muslim world, and a lot of these Islamist groups that ended up becoming, unfortunately, extreme, is a lot of this was a reaction to the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate. So the loss of the Khilafah in the 20s, even though by that time it was purely some ceremonial, purely pomp and circumstance, the loss of the Caliphate was like a trauma to the Muslim world. Because the Muslim world had been retracting from the peripheries, for centuries, Spain and the Far East and things like that. But the heartland of the Muslim world was the heartland of the Muslim world. So for something like this that was in the heartland of the Muslim world to end, all of these Islamist groups really are a reaction to that event. Some people reacted this way, some people reacted that way. So I think because of the history of it, they're sort of embedded in the heartland. So they become hyper-focused on the state of affairs of, the lands of Islam. And there weren't that many Muslim minority communities in the Western world. There were definitely in the Indian subcontinent. Muslims in India are like 500, 600 million. It's a huge minority. But at that time, before the split of India and Pakistan, of course, it was a large population. So I think it was just a historical circumstance. And there might be groups. I don't know all of these arguments. There might be some groups that talk about that in the Western world, which would be extremely foolish. But I think it's more of the reason is more for historical reasons of these groups.
So we see a lot of the extremist narrative is they rely a lot on the hadith. If you see something wrong, you should change it with your hand. How does that tie into the concept of tamkin, and they use that as a justification for or taking matters into their own hands?
Sure. So the hadith that if you see something wrong, you should change it with your hand. The important thing is the next word. And if you can't, فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطَعْ فَبِلِسَانِكَ, so then with your tongue. And if you can't, then with your heart, and that's the weakest of faith. That part of the hadith, if you can't, means to the one that interprets the hadith in the language of our interpretation, it means that changing something with your hands requires certain conditions. And if those conditions are not fulfilled, then I can change it by my tongue. And if those conditions are not filled, then I can change it just by my emotional state. It doesn't mean if I'm physically not able to. That's like a layman's reading of the hadith. That's not what the hadith means. So every action in Islam is governed by what we call the Sharia. The Sharia is a government of actions. And every action, every ruling in the Sharia is linked to that action are conditions. If those conditions exist, the action exists. If the conditions do not exist, the action doesn't exist. So the question then really becomes, well, what are the conditions to change something by hand? That's a whole other conversation. But certainly, the changing of something by the hand cannot make the matter worse, or bloody, or create hatred, or create a security threat for Muslims or something like that. I mean, so when they say, oh, well, the hadith says we have to change stuff by our hands, and then they do things, well, look what's the result of that. What they have done. They have created more problem. They've made the matter more threatening for people like us, which means that action was not justified. So, but I guess I'm just a person of the books, right? They would just say I'm just somebody who studied from the books. I don't have like the activism street cred, so I don't count. I guess people would argue, but that's the unfortunate situation, is when we approach these things, the Prophet ﷺ's words were very specific. And the Quran is very specific. And we believe that both the Quran and both the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, are of divine origin. So that means when we approach them, we have to be serious when we approach them and use our interpretive tools to extract the right meaning. But when people say, well, look, the hadith clearly says, change it by your hand. Well, no, if you can, meaning, well, what if you can't? So what's the criteria for can and cannot? It's those conditions. So that's where I think they veer off the path. But the real issue is that who said that these Muslim states are not Muslim to start out with? That's the real issue. They're saying, well, they're not Muslim. Well, why? What about them is not Muslim? Well, they do this, they don't do this, they're imperfect. Well, have you ever met a political system that's perfect? I mean, it doesn't exist, right? Because we're dealing with the human condition. The human condition is not perfect. So the argument really that Muslim governments are not Muslim, that's where the conversation, of course they're Muslim. Most of these Muslim nations state in their constitution, their founding documents, that Islam is the religion of the state. Okay, that's it, then they're Muslim. They might not be the best Muslim, but who are we the best Muslim? No, I mean, we're imperfect too. So, and that's the Khawarij mentality, that if you commit a sin, no matter what kind of sin, you're outside of Islam. It's like the mafia. If you do one thing, you're gone. Well, no, I mean, that doesn't make sense. I mean, we're imperfect. كُلُّ ابْنِ آدَمْ خَطَّاءٌ وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّائِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. The best, all humans sin, and the best of sinners are those that constantly return. So I didn't address that here, but the concept of tamkin, it is linked to this idea that we have to take it by force. But what's the basis of that? The basis for that is that the government, the state, is not legitimate. Even till today, people refer to these governments, the government of Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or the Gulf state, they say they're not legitimate. They'll say these are not legitimate. That's very dangerous. Of course they're legitimate states. They're constituted legitimate states. There's rule of law. Are they perfect? They're far from perfect. But where in Islam does it say that the state has to be perfect? I think one of the righteous, they said, if I had one supplication that I knew would be answered, I would pray for the leader of the nation or the state because of how much they're going to need that aid and assistance, because that's how difficult of a task it is. And in Arabic, what do we call a secretary or a minister? We say wazir. Well, where does that word come from? It comes from wizr. It comes from hardship. So even the name of the person in charge is like, it sucks, it's not a good thing. I mean, I know we think of it like, oh, he's a minister. But no, when you think about it, it's a tremendous responsibility that, you don't want to be. And Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar, you read all these stories about Umar, how fierce he was and how tough he was. But by the time he became Khalifa, man, he was like very, cautious and like staying up at night worried that he was going to get in trouble with Allah because he didn't fix this, he didn't fix that. I mean, he was like going to drive him crazy because of the responsibilities immense. And those are, when the Prophet ﷺ died, there was, maybe 10, 15,000 people in Medina or something like that. At the time of his janaz, I think it was 20,000. The people that marched with the Prophet ﷺ in the final Hajj were about 100,000. But not all of them lived in Medina. So I mean, you're talking about a small state. Can you imagine now being in charge of hundreds of millions of people? I mean, the responsibility is enormous. So I think the issue really comes back to the legitimacy of Islamic government. Yes or no? Of course, they're legitimate, which would make the action that they want to take by hand not legitimate because of the conditions. I mean, so on and so forth.
Thank you very much for this valuable lecture. I have attended many public lectures, but I don't remember one time that I have been like 100% in agreement with the lecturer. Today I am, because I come from Sudan, and all what you said have been applied the same way in Sudan. When the current military dictatorship in Sudan, in the name of Islam, in June 30th, just like yesterday, 28 years back, they said we come to apply Islam in Sudan and we have to do Tamkin. So what they did, they evicted, literally, all the civil servants, ambassadors, police officers, army officers. They took away everybody and put their people in government, and since then, they confiscated the power in Sudan. So I can understand what you have been saying. And all this is wrong. That we have been, this is the most clear expose of what happened, maybe in Egypt, in other countries. Now here I think there's consequence. I'm going to give you, my questions come last, but I'm going to make a little bit of analysis. What we are living now in the West is Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia? Islamophobia is just a reaction to the extremist Islamic ideas, opportunist, I say. Daesh, and Daesh is not the main current, and we are all against it because it does not represent Islam, but they are not alone. The Wahhabist government and the royal systems which are governing now in all over the Arab world, from Morocco to Bahrain, they have nothing to do with Islam. But they always come and like the governor of Saudi Arabia right now, he is telling us, I am the custodian of the two holy mosques. Who asked you to be the custodian? What are your credentials? وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. There is no shura or consultation for the government. This government is illegal, so they use the Tamkin in another way. The Shiites use the same. They consider themselves as the real, supporters of Prophet Muhammad and Ali, but actually they are using this against Sunni, and actually they have like own system of belief which has nothing to do with the Quran, which has nothing to do with Quran or Sunnah, but they make it like in a way to make the Tamkin. Same thing, the most dangerous one, which now are called like victims in the current, the Akhwan Muslimin. And when I say the Akhwan Muslimin, it means the Muslim Brotherhood, which is now is like just part of the Islamophobia. America and the West, they are considering them as terrorists finally. I think they are right, but not in the way I understand it, because they are terrorists because they want to gain the government through force, through the Tamkin, and for their false interpretation of the Quran. Sudan now, for example, is the most corrupt country in the world in the name of Tamkin. They are hypocrites. they didn't read the Quran. If they read the Quran in, I think in Surah Al-Ahzab, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. If they read it, as you said rightly, Prophet Muhammad said, we are not giving power for those who ask for it. They asked for it. They made a coup d'etat. I was a taxpayer. I used to teach University of Khartoum. I paid my taxes. And from some of these taxes, they bought arms. They put it in my head and said, state of emergency, no more rights for us Sudanese citizens, when I was a citizen of Sudan at that time. This is not right. It is time to speak out. Now, I think what is happening now is just a reaction of what we Muslims are doing in the Muslim world, whether Shiites, Saudi Arabia style Wahhabist, or Ikhwan Muslimin, which are the Muslim Brotherhood, which is now in a way also in some sort of opportunist. They are said to be supported by Qatar. So what is happening now, and the reaction to it, the Islamophobia, this is all of the false understanding of Tamkin. And I'm happy to attend this lecture. I think this is very important. I think what we are saying, every person, every Muslim in the world should listen to this and should understand what is going on. Now my question, since we are moderate, whether we are Shiite or Sunni, and when I say Sunni, it doesn't mean anything, because they are moderate Shiite, also moderate Sunni, and Islam is prevailing better in Asia, in Southeast Asia, because they are moderate, So if we are going to advocate moderate Islam or true Islam, as I think that I'm listening to you as a true Islamist today, because you don't have a political agenda, you are not coming here to gain anything, and this is my conviction. I think you agree with me to that. What is our program, us moderate Muslims, to tell the world and to tell our fellow Muslims, this is what it is, and they have to be conscious so we can start to move out these people who are just opportunists and who are not representing Islam.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand the question correctly, you're saying, what should people like us do, right? So, I mean, that's a big question. But yeah, but I think the way I look at it is that we have stopped honoring the Prophet ﷺ in our lives. And that's the difference. Are we the people of Muhammad, or are we not the people of Muhammad? Because if we are, then we look to what he did and how he lived his life to answer that question. Because he lived persecuted most of his prophetic life more than he lived when he was in Medina. And even when he was in Medina, there was really no peace until the very end. But throughout all of that time, he tried to avoid conflict with he tried to avoid conflict to the point that it had to come from revelation that he had to stand and defend himself. The Prophet ﷺ, he did not want to fight. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting has been prescribed to you, but it is detestable to you. Who is this verse to the Prophet? He did not want to fight. But it reached a point of national security for him and the few Muslims that existed at that time in Medina, the 200 people that came from Mecca, the Muhajirun, and then the few hundred of the Ansar. That was it. And they went and they fought in the Battle of Badr, because that's all, they had no other choice. But we don't, this whole line of thinking of Tamkin, it's all an extension of arrogance, of human arrogance. The Prophet ﷺ suffered with patience for 13 years. But during those 13 years, he taught the companions, he taught them how to be human, He taught them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our way to Allah is through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is our way. Right? لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Verily in the Messenger of Allah is a perfect, excellent example. And the difference I have found, the critical difference between normative Muslims, as you say, us, whether they be Sunni, whether they be Shia, whatever, Ibadi, whatever the kind, an extremist, is the love and respect of the Prophet ﷺ. Because if you love and respect him, you will seek him out, you will look towards him as an example, as inspiration, to follow his, that's what the Sunnah is. Right? That's what when we say that we follow the Sunnah, that's what it is, to see what his state was and to be like him, to find out in this calamity, in this fitna, how are we to function. Because if we agree to that, we will find that the Prophet ﷺ said, a time will come and there will be great tribulation. He called it fitnatul dahma, a tribulation of ignorance and stupidity. And there will be much killing. The person killing will not know why they killed, and the person that has been killed will not know why. The person killing will not know why they killed, and the person that was killed will not know why they were killed. So the Sahaba said, what do? Stick to the group of Muslims. Stick to the community. There's the example. What if there's no community? Kun hilsan min ahlasi baytak. Just stay at home with you and your family. Don't be a part of the fitna. Don't be part of the tribulation. So, I mean, that's, I don't think we've reached that point necessarily, but for people like us, the solution is in going back to that root and to build our community based on that. And not worry about what's out there. Because if we build a solid community, inshallah, the generation after it and the one after that, they will be better than we are. They'll be much better than we are. They'll be more equipped to deal with this problem. And through that example, people will see the stupidity. These people that are on social media, that are Muslim activists, it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. And they're all doing this in the name of Islam. And they're trying to yank the community this way and that way for this political agenda and that political agenda. It's all based on nothing. Really, it's based on nothing. It's a house of cards. So we don't want to be a toy in that. We don't want to be a card in that house of cards. We want to be on firm ground. To do that, we have to go back to the root. And the root for us is the manual of this faith, and that's the Prophet ﷺ. If you look at all of the extremists, if you look at like Sayyid Qutb and his tafsir and all of his writing, all of these people, very rarely do they mention the Prophet ﷺ. This guy, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he refers to the Prophet, or he is referred to as like Sayyidun al-Khalifa, such and such, and when they mention the Prophet, they say Muhammad. Yani they honor this idiot more than they honor the Prophet. They are people that do not respect the Prophet. And the mark of the true believer in any expression of Islam is their disposition towards the Prophet. Because everyone worships God. Very few people are going to criticize God in the history of Islam. But the person that does not respect the Prophet, you will see it in their suluk, you will see it in their actions and how they treat other people. And the person that respects the Prophet ﷺ, they will have a sense of deference and reverence, and they will try to be better. That's for us. For us, because we don't have political strength, and that's not our game. That's what I believe. That's my answer.